Welcome, everyone, to Journeys to the Books of the Prophets. Tonight, we are finishing the first book of Kings and moving into the second book of Kings. This will be the last book in this series. I never intended to go into Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. So we have many, many weeks to go, but everyone should know that the second book of Melachim will be the end of this particular series. So we're on the last chapter of the first book of Kings, chapter 22, for those who are following. And here we have a case where we've had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and a complete split in the people. But here we have an unusual case where the king of the northern kingdom, it's still Ahab, the evil king Ahab, and his wife, Jezebel, they're still with us here. But he turns to Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat is the king of the southern kingdom, and he is considered one of the better kings. He's considered a righteous person, a good king. He follows the Torah. And so Ahab turns to him and says, do you know that in the north of Israel, in a place called Ramat Gilad, that Aram took it from us, and it's really time for us to take it back. Will you fight with me to take back Ramat Gilad? So first of all, that's unusual because they're at each other's throats all of the time. And Jehoshaphat agrees. And he says, literally, your horses are like my horses, your men are like my men. We will go together. And the king and Jehoshaphat said, but let's ask the prophets if this is a good idea. In those days, it was very, very common to ask the prophet of the generation whether it's a good idea to go to war. These are matters of life and death. And so Ahab, even for those who have been following, he's had a number of chances to do tshuva, and he just doesn't seem really to do tshuva. So he calls 400 prophets. In the text, it just says he called 400 prophets. So when I was reading this, my first question is, according to the text, Ahab and Jezebel had killed all of the prophets, except for Eliyahu Navi, who is still alive and will play a prominent part in today's class, and the 100 prophets that were being hidden by Obadiah, 50 in 2 different caves. So my first question is, where are these 400 prophets from all of a sudden? And so the explanation is that he actually is still serving the Baal. And even though Eliyahu Navi killed 400 of the priests of Baal, 450 priests of Baal, they have now been replaced. And so he's asking these priests of idol worship whether they should go to war. And they all say, yes, you should go to war, you'll be successful. This is what we see in prophecy. So Jehoshaphat, who is a God-fearing person, says, well, isn't there any other prophet that we could ask? In other words, he obviously didn't trust prophets of idol worship. And so Ahab says, well, there is a prophet, and we assume that he's one of the 100 prophets that were saved, and his name is Micaiah. And he says, but he hates me for good reason. But Jehoshaphat was insistent that they take a prophet of God, not a prophet of idol worship. And so they call him. And he says, but before he does, one of these false prophets, he makes these horns of iron, and he kind of puts on a theater here of how Israel is going to, with these horns, defeat Aram. And then it's time for Micaiah to give his prophecy. And he says, yes, you should go up and fight. But Ahab is suspicious because this prophet has always prophesied against Ahab because he's an idol worshiper. And he says, you're lying to me. I don't believe you. Tell the truth. So Micaiah says something very interesting. He says, this is the vision that I had. I had a vision, and I saw God sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven were around him. And God said, who is going to entice Ahab to go to battle? Meaning that in a certain way, again, this is in human language of a deep vision that he had. Who is going to entice Ahab to go to battle because he will be defeated? And it's time, if for those who have been following, God already said the days of Ahab are numbered, and all of the evil that he did, it will come back upon him. So this prophet is saying, God, and so God says, well, how are we going to do this? And so they said, well, we'll put a spirit into all these other prophets who will say, yes, go to war. And so Micaiah says that this is a setup. But Ahab didn't believe him. And the strange thing here is, and I couldn't find any commentary, that Jehoshaphat decides that they will go to war, even though the prophet is saying that this is going to be the way to end Ahab's rule. So again, I didn't find an answer why Jehoshaphat, who was a God-fearing person, didn't listen to this prophet and say, no, this is what the prophet of God is saying. Nonetheless, they decide to go to war. And as always, there's lots of details here. And as I said, we're not going to go into every detail of what I consider the minor stories, and rather save it for, actually, you'll see the incident that we're about to hear about. And so they go to war, and in short, Ahab is mortally injured. And he tries to survive, but he dies. And for those who remember, God said that when your day comes, your blood will pour in the street, and the dogs will come and lick it up. And that's exactly what the text says here. And because of that, Israel was defeated. And we'll say the only good thing that came out of it is Ahab has died. And it says here, and all the other deeds of Ahab are written in the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. That's this book, Melachim Aleph. And so Ahab dies, and Ahaziah, his son, takes over. You have to remember the northern kingdom was very strong, was very wealthy, was very well-to-do. They were well established. And that's how somehow Ahab managed to be king for all the years that he was. And now the text is like reviewing about Jehoshaphat, that he was the son of Asa. If you remember, Asa was also one of the better kings, and he reigned for many, many years. And he followed the Torah, and Jehoshaphat followed in his footsteps. So for many years, the southern kingdom was in good hands, which is not true of the northern kingdom. From the time that the northern kingdom was set up, we have not seen one good king. They were all considered evil and idol worshipers, and turned the people against the Torah. So Jehoshaphat, it talks a little bit about how he ruled. And now he passes away. And we're at the end of chapter 22. And here it says that Ahaziah, so he ruled instead of his father Ahab. And it says that he did evil in the eyes of God. Not quite as bad as his father, but bad enough. And that's really how the book of 1 Kings ends. Melachim Aleph ends that Ahab, who's been a major player here, passes away, and Jehoshaphat of the southern kingdom also passes away, and that leads us in to the second book of Kings. So we begin with the first chapter, and it says that the son of Ahab, who was ruling, he fell from an upper story, and he was very injured. He was very sick. And so he sent messengers and said, "Go inquire of Baal Zavuv, the god of Ekron, whether I will recover from this or not." And so God says to Eliyahu Navi, this whole last chapter, Eliyahu Navi was not part of the story. Here he comes back on the scene. God appears to Eliyahu and says to him, "You should go to this king and tell him you will not recover. You are not going to get up from your bed, from your sick bed. You're finished." And so Eliyahu is now going to go to the king and tell him. And so messengers came. One second. All right. So messengers were looking for Eliyahu Navi, but they came back to the king and they said, why did you return? And they said, well, we met a person. They didn't say that it was Eliyahu. They said they met a person. And he says, why have you inquired from a false god when you could have asked a prophet of Israel to answer your question? And so the king is like, that must be Eliyahu. Who else would talk like that? He said, go get him for me. And so he sent a captain with 50 soldiers. So it says that Eliyahu went up to a tall hill, and this captain with 50 men come and said, they address him and they say, you, man of God, the king has ordered you to come to him. And so you must come down from where you are and come with us to the king. And so Eliyahu says, a little bit sarcastic, because they called him a man of God. He didn't call himself a man of God. So he says, if I am a man of God, then let fire come down from heaven and it will consume you and your 50 men. And that's exactly what happened. Fire comes down from heaven and consumes this captain with the 50 men. So somehow word gets back to the king that all these people have been consumed by fire from Eliyahu Navi. He sends another captain with 50 men. And to make it a long story short, the same thing happens. They address him as the man of God. The king has ordered you to come. And of course, remember, Ahab and his wife, they were, when he was still alive, they were killing all the prophets. So here, Eliyahu is in a certain way acting in self-defense. So he brings fire down from heaven, and this captain and the 50 men are consumed. It happens a third time. And then God comes to Eliyahu and says, don't be afraid. Go before the king and tell him what the prophecy is. So Eliyahu does. He goes and he appears before the king, and he says, just in short, you will not get up from your sickbed and you will die. And he leaves. And that's exactly what happens. This king dies. And that brings us to the end of the first chapter. Again, we're not going through every detail here. But this brings Eliyahu back into the story. And now chapter 2 is one of the more dramatic chapters in the book of Kings. And this is when God was going to take Eliyahu away from this world, and he was going to take him up to heaven. And so Eliyahu, remember, Elisha is now his main prophet, his second, in a sense, his replacement. He's already at Mount Sinai. God said to find Elisha, and he will take over from you. And after that, they were inseparable. Elisha was what's called serving Eliyahu. Not just that he was a student, but he was serving him. And so Eliyahu says to Elisha, you should stay here because I'm going to go to Beit El. Beit El was, this is again in the northern kingdom. And Elisha says, I swear to you, I will not leave your side. And so he goes with him to Beit El. And when they're at Beit El, these 50 prophets that Avadiyahu saved, they were based in Beit El and by Jericho. And so when Eliyahu comes with Elisha, they take Elisha to the side and say, don't you know that God is about to take Eliyahu away? And Elisha says, yes, I know. So the question is, because the text doesn't explain, well, how did these prophets know that? And how did Elisha know it? That's why he said, I will not leave your side. And so it's an interesting idea here, is these are 50 prophets. And apparently right before this, they felt their prophetic powers fading, weakening. And they understood it must mean that God is going to take Eliyahu. And that's why we're experiencing this weakening of spirit. But so how did Elisha know? Elisha, it was just the opposite. As Eliyahu is about to be taken away, he understood from a strengthening of his spirit that Eliyahu is about to be taken away. They were all totally connected to Eliyahu. He was the Rebbe, he was the prophet, he was their teacher. And so after Beit El, Eliyahu says to Elisha, you stay here. I am going to Jericho. Elisha answers again, I, under no circumstances, will leave your side. So they go together to Jericho. And then the same thing happens. The prophets of Jericho take Elisha to the side and say, do you understand that God is about to take Eliyahu to heaven? And Elisha says, yes, I know. And then Eliyahu said, you stay here because God has sent me to go down to the Jordan River. And again, Elisha refuses to leave his side. And so they go, they actually cross the Jordan. What happens is Eliyahu takes his mantle, his robe, and he casts it on the water of the Jordan, and it splits. And he and Elisha cross to the other side. And so then it says, Eliyahu turns to Elisha and says, I'm about to be taken to heaven. What can I give you? What is your request? And I will try to fulfill it. And so Elisha says, please give me 2 times your spirit, double your spirit. And Eliyahu says, that is not so simple. That is not an easy request. But if you see me when I ascend to heaven, then you will be granted with double my spirit. And then it says they were walking along the way and talking. And as they were walking, it says that a chariot of fire appeared, and it separated between them. And Eliyahu rose to heaven in a chariot of fire. So one of the questions is, what were they discussing? What were they discussing? So here's an example. We've run into this many, many times. There are many different opinions. And the truth is, we will never really know, because each one of the opinions is based on either tradition or a firm logic based on the words of all of these verses. So one opinion is they were talking about the Shema. Now this makes sense because later, many years later, Rabbi Akiva dies saying the Shema. And here it's clear, Elisha knows he's about to be taken. Eliyahu just told him, I'm about to go to heaven in a fiery chariot. What can I do for you? And so the fact is that one of the opinions, they were discussing the Shema. So this is played out in the future with Rabbi Akiva. The whole story of Rabbi Akiva being tortured with burning combs. They were literally flaying the flesh off of him. And his students are watching this, and he begins to prepare himself to say the Shema. And they say, Rebbe, how do you have the state of mind? And he says that my whole life, I wanted to fulfill the mitzvah of loving God with my whole soul. Like it says, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol me'odecha. And you shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might, your means. So Rabbi Akiva says, my whole life I've wanted to fulfill this mitzvah. Now that I have the chance, I shouldn't take it. So he says the Shema, and as he says the word echad, he elongates the daled and he dies. His soul leaves him. So one of the opinions is that they were discussing the Shema. And implicit in this is the idea of what's called Kiddush Hashem. We know that because of the Shema of Rabbi Akiva, that after that, unfortunately, millions of people went to their deaths in what's called sanctifying the name of God by saying the Shema. This was a known thing in the concentration camps, in the gas chambers, that literally millions of people left this world with the Shema on their lips. But here we see, in a certain way, almost a precedent for it. Another opinion is they were discussing Ma'aseh Bereshit, the account of creation. Another opinion is they were discussing Ma'aseh Merkavah. Now this, for those who followed our series on Ma'aseh Merkavah, we actually discussed this whole incident in great detail. I see many people were part of that series. So hopefully you'll remember that we learned this, but in a different context, in the context Because here he goes up to heaven in a fiery chariot. So here we're not going to go back over everything we learned about Maseh Merkavah, but some say that's what they were discussing. They were discussing the secrets of creation and the secrets of our role in this world and our connection to God. Now, there's also a question, why was Elisha asking for double a portion of his ruach, of his spirit? So what's very, very interesting, and it's pointed out that according to many, when they count the different miracles that Eliyahu did in the text, he did 8 miracles. He probably did many, many more, but that is what is recorded. And what's interesting is Elisha, there's exactly double the amount of miracles that he performed, 16. And we'll actually get to a few of them this evening. And another opinion, which I had never heard before, but I liked very, very much is, and this will take a little explanation. So first of all, we see in the life of Eliyahu, fire is a major component. We see this at Mount Sinai. So one of the ways that God appears to him is in fire. And then Eliyahu brings down fire from heaven at Mount Carmel to prove to the people who is the real God. And here tonight we just learned that he brings fire down from heaven 3 times. And so Eliyahu is considered a fiery, zealous kind of a person. That is his personality. And the fire that he manifests is indicative of his whole ruach, his whole personality. Now we learn this also, that it says in the Gemara, and this is one of the more explicit hints to reincarnation. Reincarnation, Gilgul Neshamot, is not mentioned in the Torah or the Tanakh or the Gemara or the Mishnah or the Midrash. It's discussed, though, extensively in the Kabbalah, in the Zohar, in the Bahir, the Arizal, the Baal Shem Tov. But one of the hints is the statement in the Gemara, Pinchas hu Eliyahu. Pinchas, who was also a very zealous person, even God says that he acted zealously when he killed Zimri and Cosby and stopped a plague from destroying all of Israel. And he was granted a covenant of peace. But it was because of his zealousness. And we're told that, and I'm doing this in short, is the question is, where did Pinchas get the koach, the strength he killed a prince of Israel who was having relations in an open way with the daughter of the idol-worshiping king and country. And even Moshe didn't know what to do. The elders didn't know what to do. They were frozen. And Pinchas goes and he asks permission of Moshe, and he reminded him of what the Jewish law is in such a case of such a desecration of God's name. And he acts. And so the Arizal explains what gave him the power, the strength to act. And he says that at that moment, the souls of Nadav and Avihu entered into Pinchas. Nadav and Avihu also die by a fire from God that comes and consumes them on the day that the Mishkan is inaugurated, because they went into the Holy of Holies without being commanded to do that. And they brought fire into the Holy of Holies with the incense, but a fire came from God and consumed them. And we're told, that's a very complicated story, but we're told that their souls are very, very great souls. And so at the moment that Pinchas needed to act, the souls of Nadav and Avihu, which were very fiery, came into Pinchas and gave him the strength to act. And then we make the connection. Pinchas, hu Eliyahu. Pinchas becomes Eliyahu. And so now we see Eliyahu is full of fire. So here we see a string of fiery personalities where fire plays a major part of the stories. And so Nadav and Avihu enter into Pinchas. Pinchas enters into Eliyahu. And now Eliyahu, who has brought fire down many times, ascends to heaven in a fiery chariot. So this is a very, very deep and profound understanding of the story of really hundreds and hundreds of years that went into developing the personality of Eliyahu and his ascending to heaven in a fiery chariot. And so one of the explanations when Elisha is asking for a double portion of the spirit of Eliyahu, what he was asking for is that he would also have the inspiration, the power, the strength of Nadav and Avihu. That's the double portion here. And I just learned this, and I was very, very taken by this explanation, that's what he was asking for, because that the soul of Pinchas in Eliyahu, which had the souls of Nadav and Avihu, that is what gave Eliyahu the strength to be who he was. And so that is what Elisha is asking for. He's almost asking for specifics of the double portion is the souls of Nadav and Avihu should be manifest in him as well. So what is Elisha's response to seeing Eliyahu rising to heaven in a fiery chariot? So he says, one second. So he says, I want to read it in the Hebrew. Avi Avi, Rechav Yisrael Uparshav, V'lo Ra'uhu Od. He says, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen, and he saw him no longer. He saw him ascending, and he cried out, my father, the chariot of Israel. So this is one of the things that we learned. One of the statements of the Gemara is that the Avot, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they are the chariot. And in our series on Maaseh Merkavah, we learned this whole idea of there is, as it were, the chariot of God. And there's also how human beings can be a chariot for God. And so that is what Elisha is seeing. And he's bemoaning the fact that the chariot of Israel has taken Eliyahu away. He didn't see him any longer. So the question is, Eliyahu wasn't his father, but he's crying out, Avi, Avi, my father, my father. So it's explained that a student of not just any teacher, one's teacher, one's Rebbe, he becomes like a father. And that the teacher looks at the student, not just as a student, but also as a child. And that's why all of the prophets of that generation were called B'nai Nevi'im, the children of the prophets. But what it really meant that they were all children of Eliyahu. He was the prophet, and he was the one who began this idea of schools of prophecy. And so they were called the B'nai Nevi'im. In our day, we have a classic example that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, as is known, had no physical children. But he made it clear that everyone in Chabad he considered them his children. So he had like thousands, tens of thousands of people that he considered his children. So what happens now is that here we see, this is not the first time, we see that Yaakov, when he hears about Yosef, he tore his clothes. And here it says that Elisha, he did like Kriya. He tore his clothes. This is like his father. And that's one of the mourning customs, to tear your garment. So he tears his garment, and the mantle of Eliyahu did not go up to heaven with him. So he took the mantle and he recrossed the Jordan, and he did the same thing that Eliyahu did. He cast his mantle down and he says, "Where is the God of Eliyahu?" And when he struck the waters, it parted and he crossed to the other side. And some of the prophets witnessed this. And so they understood immediately that Elisha is now the prophet, and he has the same ruach as Eliyahu. And so Elisha goes back to Jericho, because that's where they were before they crossed the Jordan. And so the prophets, because they didn't witness this, only Elisha witnessed this. And also, I just want to mention that why did Eliyahu, at God's command, cross the Jordan? And so one of the explanations is that he wanted to be as close as he could to where Moshe Rabbeinu is buried. Now, we don't know where Moshe Rabbeinu is buried. The end of the book of Devarim says explicitly that to this day, we do not know where Moshe is buried, but we know approximately where he's buried, approximately. And so in the previous class, we discussed many connections between Moshe and Eliyahu. Eliyahu goes to Mount Sinai. He stands in the cave that Moshe stood in when the 13 Mirot of Rachamim were revealed to him. Moshe had to run away from Pharaoh. Eliyahu had to run away from Ahab and Izebel. And they were both prophets. And Eliyahu fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, just like Moshe had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. Moshe was a prophet, Eliyahu was a prophet. So here, he's taken up to heaven in close proximity to where Moshe was buried. So Elisha is now back in Jericho. And the prophets who understood that Eliyahu has been taken, but they don't know what that means really. And so they say to Elisha, maybe we should look for him. Maybe he was lifted up and he fell down. He descended back to earth. Maybe he's somewhere wandering in the mountains. We should go look for him. And Elisha says, no, you don't know what just happened. But they pressed him, and Elisha agreed. He said, okay, you want to look for him? Go look. So it says that they searched the entire area for 3 days, and they didn't find anything. And so they come back to Elisha, and then the people of Jericho come to Elisha and say, this is really a very decent place, but the water is cursed. We can't drink the water. And so, like, our life here has become very bitter. Now here, there's a whole question. What are they doing in Jericho anyways? Didn't God tell Yoshua never to rebuild Jericho? So again, they're different of opinions. If you remember, the whole beginning of Eliyahu making a decree that there would be no rain until he decreed it happened in Jericho, because there was a person who changed the name of Jericho. Instead of it ending with a vav, he changed it to end with a hey, and thought that's how we can get away from this idea that this place should never be rebuilt. But part of the curse that Yoshua received is anyone who does try to build Jericho, they will pay with their elder son and their younger son. And that's what happened to this person. His 2 sons died as they were building Jericho. So it's a question, what are these people doing there? So obviously they were the leftovers from this attempt to rebuild Jericho. It could be that they weren't in what's called Jericho proper. They were just in the area. Nonetheless, the waters were cursed. And this is connected to the curse that Yoshua received from God about not rebuilding Jericho. So Elisha said to them, bring me a new kli, a new flask, and put salt into it, and bring it to me. And he went to the source of the spring, and he cast this water with the salt by the spring, and it healed the waters. And Elisha said, God has said the waters are now healed. There will be no more death. And apparently the women were miscarrying. And he said that that curse has been taken away from you. And so here, the people already are saying Elisha is truly the replacement for Eliyahu. He's already performing miracles. So here it's interesting because this is not the first time that water has been sweetened, bitter waters being sweetened by something bitter. This takes us back to Moshe, when after they crossed the Red Sea, they went 3 days without water and they came to a place called Mara, and they couldn't drink the waters because it was bitter. And God said, take a tree and throw it into the water and it will sweeten the waters. So one more mystical opinion is, what's this tree that Moshe threw in the water? It was the tree of life. And they went 3 days without water, and the sages interpreted this to mean they went 3 days without learning Torah. And that's why the Baal Shem Tov says it's not that the waters were bitter. It says marim hem. The people were bitter because they were so involved with the booty that they had gotten from the Egyptians who had drowned in the sea. They forgot to be learning Torah. Based on this, the sages established that publicly a Jewish community should never go 3 days without reading the Torah. That's where it comes from. Therefore, we read the Torah publicly on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat, so that more than 3 days would never go by, because again, it's interpreted they went 3 days without water as meaning the Torah. But the other explanation is that he threw a bitter branch into the water. I don't remember exactly, but there are different opinions what exact tree it was. But this is this idea that the sages later said, look at the difference between the way God heals and human beings heal. Human beings heal with opposites. God heals with same. And this is what's called the secret of homeopathy. It's also the secret of vaccinations. Vaccination is you take a little bit of the disease that you want to vaccinate against, and you vaccinate a person so they have a little bit of it so that the body creates antibodies against what you want to prevent. So that's likes curing likes. So that's what Elisha does here. He sweetens the water through the salt, which is considered bitter. Now, what happens afterwards is we'll call it a strange story. Elisha leaves there to go to Beit El, because that's one of the last places Eliyahu was. So while he was going there, it says some young boys came out and taunted him and were saying, you baldy, because apparently Elisha was bald. And they were making fun of him. And so as he passed by, so he turned and he cursed them. And then it says that 2 bears came out of the forest, and the actual words are that they tore apart 42 of these young children. So this is not a simple story. Like here, already we're seeing Elisha with the same zealousness of Eliyahu. Already tonight we learned that Eliyahu brought fire down from heaven and destroyed the captain and 50 of his soldiers three different times. But there's a lot of discussion about, first of all, what does it mean, na'arim ketanim, little children? So many of the commentaries say they weren't little children. These were people who had small minds. It's called mochin dekatnut. They were small-minded. And why were they jeering Elisha? What purpose? Because he is bald? Doesn't make sense. So the sages explain what's happening here. These people who were jeering him had a cartel. Their cartel was, because the waters were undrinkable in Jericho, they had a business where they brought water from a distance and they sold it to the people at exorbitant prices. And now that Elisha had sweetened the waters, it's as if he took away their parnasa. He took away their way of making a living. And so they weren't very good people. They were taking advantage of all of the people. And so that is why Elisha cursed them. So he understood who they were, why they were jeering him. Remember, he's a prophet. He understood the whole story here. And he cursed them. And then it doesn't say he cursed them that a bear would come out of the forest and tear them apart. It just says that he cursed them. So there's a discussion again, like, did two bears really come out of the forest and consume them? And so some take it literally, but others, and it became, a saying there was no forest and there were no bears. And this became a saying to this day. Like if someone is, let's say, explaining some like fantastic story, and so some people will say, I don't remember exactly in Hebrew. I see Toby shaking her head. She probably knows, but it's something like Lo haya ya'ar, lo haya dubim. There was no forest and there were no bears. It's like symbolic. Lo dubim, lo ya'ar. Thank you. No bears and no ya'ar. It's somehow symbolic language that when he cursed them, their fortunes vanished. Their business vanished, but because it was an evil business. Now, without, I don't know if I should even say this, but I'm not saying this in a political way, for or against, but I can't believe as we're learning this, that what just happened in Venezuela is talking about cartels, talking about evil businesses. I couldn't stop myself from making some kind of a comparison without discussing, is it constitutional, international law? I'm not going into that place. But here, Elisha doesn't just curse people for no reason. He saw, and actually one of the explanations is, again, it's connected to Moshe, is if you remember, when Moshe, he goes out to check about his brethren, he now understands that he is Jewish, but he's still the prince of Egypt, and he sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Jew, and it says he looked here and he looked there, and he killed the Egyptian, and he buried him. And so the commentaries say, what does it mean he looked here and he looked there? Obviously, the simple meaning is he was looking to see if anyone is watching. If someone's watching, it probably isn't a good idea for the prince of Egypt to be killing an Egyptian taskmaster who's beating a Jew, which was happening all the time. That's a simple understanding, but the commentaries say he was looking into the future and he saw that no good would come from this person. And therefore, he killed him. It wasn't just that he was beating this Jew to death, but he saw that no good would come from him. And so one of the commentaries says the same thing. Elisha, who is a prophet, he sees that these people who are jeering him, that no good is going to come from them. That just like they had one cartel, they're going to start another cartel and do more evil. And so therefore he cursed them. But again, did two bears really come out of the forest and tear these people apart? Again, it says young children, but the sages don't understand it as young children. And so with that, we finish chapter 2. And like I said, for the rest of the book of Melachim, those places where, and again, I have the responsibility where I feel it's worth it to delve into the story in a deep way, I will. And those chapters that deal with, call it, less well-known stories or less impactful stories, we will go a bit faster through them. So we finished the last chapter of the book of Kings, Aleph Melachim, and here we started in the 2 chapters of Melachim Bet.